On today's Live Open Daily, I have two questions for you. First, how many times this year, when looking at a new game, did you tell yourself, I'll just wait for a sale? Second question, aside from price, how do you define value in the game? Don't worry, I'm not going to be judging you, I'm just having a conversation here. I'm your host, Live Open Mike, and this conversation spun off an article I read from AppleInsider.com. This article is not VR specific, but I'm going to get there, so just bear with me here. The article is titled Why AAA Games Promoted by Apple Flop in the App Store, and this is in relation to Assassin's Creed Mirage, Death Stranding, and a couple of Resident Evil games, all launching on iOS for iPhone and for iPad. I'm going to skip all the preamble here and just get straight to the numbers. Assassin's Creed Mirage was downloaded approximately 123,000 times. I should point out here that you can download the trial of the game, and then somewhere in there it will give you an option to buy the game at the full price. So with that said, yeah, it was downloaded 123,000 times, but it's only managed gross revenue of $138,000. The report believes that the revenue level indicates that fewer than 3,000 people were willing to unlock the full game at $50. The game performed worse than the previously made for mobile release Assassin's Creed Rebellion that launched in 2018 but managed 1.9 million downloads and $981,000 in revenue for the same post-launch period. Skipping ahead in the article, the problem isn't just felt by Ubisoft. Others that Apple prominently featured in its presentations have suffered a similar fate. Resident Evil 4 has been downloaded 357,000 times, analysts say, with a revenue of just $208,000. At a $30 price to unlock, about 7,000 people paid for the full game. Resident Evil 7 managed to hit 817,000 downloads and $420,000 in revenue with a cheaper $15.99 price that equates to about 34,000 people paying for it. Death Stranding has also failed to capture the audience, earning $348,000 to date. Requiring an upfront purchase of $20, it's approximated that the game has probably managed just 23,000 sales. The biggest problem these AAA style releases on iPhone has relates to money, and is something the analysts agree on. With premium mobile games priced at between $5 and $10, along with the sea of titles offering free-to-play gaming, that makes for a tough market for a high-priced game to penetrate. There's also the allure of console gaming that can get in the way. People who can afford flagship mobile devices and $50 for games are likely to have the resources to enjoy games on PC and console as well. On the other hand, players who can afford gaming devices or high-performance mobile phones are less likely to make a one-time $50 purchase. There's more in the article, but those are the relevant points I wanted to read. And then we come over to VR, and specifically we're going to start with the Apple Vision Pro. Demio recently just launched the Apple Vision Pro, and immediately you saw reports, even from VR enthusiasts, saying why are they charging $40 for that? Demio originally released at $30 and the price increased to $40 in January 2023. That was a permanent price increase to cover the cost of development for all the additional things the Resolution Games added into that game. And you saw VR enthusiasts and even other content creators straight up saying, hey, at $40 that's too much. Oh look, the game's on sale. Now look, I'm not trying to point these people out or saying they said anything necessarily wrong. I'm just pointing out that there's been a massive culture shift in the last, I'm going to say a few years or so, in terms of the discount culture towards gaming. Back when I was younger, and even now when you go to Walmart, you would see this gigantic metal bin whenever you went to a department store, and there would be bargain basement game prices for that. You find games for like $3, $4, $5 for old systems that you may still have lying around. Because usually after, let's say when the Xbox One came out, you would find a bunch of Xbox 360 deals lying around in the bargain bin. If you went to GameStop, you see the same stuff. So you go bargain shopping and you look around either online or in the actual store and go, you know what, I've been meaning to play that game, and you pick it up for a rock bottom price. If you're watching this podcast right now, I'm going to wager that you probably have a game on your headset, either on Steam or on Quest or Pico or whatever, that you probably picked up for just a few bucks, and you probably haven't even installed it yet, and you don't even know when you're going to play it. But hey, you know what, it was on your wish list or it was on sale, and you grabbed it because what a deal. And that's why I asked the question at the start of this podcast about the perception of value. I'm going to go back to Demio for just a second. For those who don't know, Demio is a multiplayer tabletop role-playing game where you could pick any one of like 7 different characters and team up with 1 to 3 friends and go dungeon crawling through 3 levels. The first 2 levels have a key guardian that you have to kill to get the key and then unlock to progress to the next one. The third one has a boss fight. There's 5 different levels in the game, and depending on how good you are when you first start, there's also cosmetics and unlockables and things like that as you play the game more and more and gain experience points. Personally, it's one of my favorite games and I've put hundreds of hours into it, but because the levels are procedurally generated, no 2 playthroughs are exactly the same, even though the boss character remains exactly the same. but like the way you progress through the levels, where points of interest like treasure chests and things are always randomized every time, along with the enemy placement, so you never know what you're going to get in any given playthrough. If a game like that doesn't have a perception of value of $40, what does? Because a lot of games that you see in the higher bracket are mostly single player adventures, your Half-Life Alyxes, your Skyrims, your Asgard's Wrath, things like that. Meanwhile, most of your multiplayer co-op games generally are free to play, or they're somewhere in the range of like $20 to $30, if not lower than that, because they'll just pack the game with microtransactions and cosmetics to keep you coming back in, which, as much as I hate it, seems to be like the sea change of where the industry is going. But let's take a more recent example, Arizona Sunshine 2. People were really excited when that first game was announced by Vertigo Games because the original Arizona Sunshine is absolutely beloved in the VR community. It was basically a pioneering game. So now we're getting a sequel and oh my gosh, there's a dog in there. How cute is that? Then the game released and people found out that the campaign is about 5 hours long, which is roughly the same length as the first game. And immediately the perception of value started to come up because unlike the first game, which now you can buy in almost every single Steam sale or Quest sale available, this new one was priced at $50, which is $10 higher than what you typically find on like the high end of the VR market. Most high-end games are around $40. So immediately those questions of value did come up, even though Vertigo Games included the full campaign to be playable in co-op so you can play the whole game with a friend. Co-op is like instant replay factor for any game. And then there's a horde mode where you can just fight endless amounts of zombies and then there's a horde mode, which a lot of these games have, where you can just fight endless amounts of zombies with a friend of yours, and Vertigo has continually added new maps, new weapons, and things like that to the game to keep that content fresh. Take another example, Asgard's Wrath 2. This is a 100-hour plus RPG if you just play the single player campaign, and then you tack on a whole separate roguelite mode that has endless amounts of content, procedural generation, and they're constantly adding maps to the game. Also, as you progress within the single player campaign, you bring new characters back to that because there's 4 different characters you can play as with 4 different loadouts, but you have to unlock them in the main storyline to get them in the Uncharted Rifts, which is the roguelite mode I just mentioned. Add to that, as you get achievements throughout the main storyline campaign, you actually unlock more maps and the Uncharted Rifts. Plus the developers are doing new cosmic events every single month where you have to like kill a certain number of enemies or do a certain amount of achievements and you unlock new cosmetics, new maps, things like that. Again, this is an endless amount of gameplay content and people were saying it's not worth $60. So where does the value start? And it feels like when I was talking about that sea change earlier, that is shifted strictly, almost strictly to price. It doesn't seem to matter how much is in the game or how much time you're going to be able to spend in it. The point is the price. The price is the most important thing. And I'm not blaming anyone for that. We're in the middle of the reception, times are tight. And again, I've said this on multiple podcasts. I'm just as guilty of it as anyone. I always look for games on sale. As I record this podcast, Steam is having currently a summer sale where you can get games as deep as like 90% off, including a whole lot of VR games. Quest is also having a June sale that ends on June 30th, 2 days after this podcast drops, where you can catch a whole bunch of games on sale. There's also their Quest Plus subscription program, where it used to just be 2 games a month and that was it, but now they give you a full list of catalog games and there are special discounts specifically for Quest Plus subscribers that aren't available to just anyone else who owns a Quest. There are deals to be had everywhere. Now this is summer where, unlike say the movie industry where you get a lot of big tentpole films coming out during the summer, the gaming industry seems to be trying to build up hype for the fall and the winter seasons because they're trying to sell consoles with all these games. So instead of getting a bunch of new releases, instead you start getting like a ton of these showcases. Almost every major developer does a showcase during the summer now, and then there are these third-party ones like the Jeff Keighley efforts to start building up hype for all these major releases coming soon. You see Nintendo do one, Sony just did State of Play a few weeks ago, Nintendo just had a Nintendo Direct, Microsoft, Ubisoft, so on and so forth, and all they're doing is building up hype for the big fall releases and going into the holiday season where hopefully this software will sell hardware. So what ends up happening during the summer is now we get all these sales on games that came out sometime in the last few years. Sometimes it's recently, just a few months ago. There's one game on Steam that just released this week that is currently 20% off, which I think is just madness. But that's the culture that seems to be cultivated right now where everyone's just looking for a deal. Last night after my stream on Twitch, I hopped on a voice chat with a friend of mine that I always talk to in Discord a few times a week, and one of the first things we did was go scroll through and see what was on sale on Steam, and we ended up picking up like 2 or 3 games each. Now, just being straight up, I picked the game up because it was on sale. Probably not going to play the game until next year, if not the year after that. There's some games I might not ever play because I'm picking them up as part of bundles. There's bundles on sites like Fanatical and Humble Bundle. I know there's always bundles on the Quest store. You see bundles on Steam as well. There's always a deal to be had there. Even if you see a bundle and you say, you know what, I don't really care about these 2 games, but those 3 games represent value to me and I'm only going to get them for like $2 or $3 a pop, I'm going to buy this whole bundle and get 5 games, 2 of which I'm never going to touch. And while that's fine for developers, especially on some of their older titles, to get some incremental sales on a game that just really wasn't doing anything sales wise for them, I just find it really interesting now that, let's say, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, the biggest selling window for a game was usually within its first like 30 days of release, sometimes even the first 90 days of release, because that was the window where the most new players are going to come in and buy it at full price. But now we're seeing games go on sale within like a month or two, and even when you take out stuff like Meta's referral system, we'll talk about that in a minute, there's just this notion that, you know what, I don't need to buy this game right away because I'm not that hype about it when I know I'm going to get it on sale for 20% off, 30% off, 40% off, probably in a couple of months. So I'll just wait. So most of us now have wish lists of games that we're kind of monitoring. We're using those to monitor sales and catch a game on sale, because then we'll get that notification and go ahead and grab it. I was thinking about this when I look back through the number of VR games that I bought last year, and I can count the number of games that I bought the week it came out at full price probably on one hand, especially on the Quest platform, because up until recently, when they kind of made some tweaks to it that we still don't really know the parameters of, the Meta referral system was a thing where you will wait for at least one person to buy the game at full price, and if you go into any Discord, including my own, you're going to find a list of all the referrals for pretty much every single game on the Quest store, so no matter what, you can get that game at 25% off. The culture has really shifted to a point where it behooves gamers to either wait until reviews come out to see if it's even worth it at full price, and even if the reviews are absolutely stellar, then it becomes, okay, do I really still want to play it that bad? A game can have a 5-star review, 10 out of 10 on IGN and Game Radar, Game Insider, all these sites, and you still don't rush to play it right away unless it's a franchise you really care about. One of the last games outside of VR that I bought when it first came out was Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I bought that day one when it came out because I love the Legend of Zelda franchise. I have ever since I was a kid. That dates back to 1986 when the first game came out. When you have legacy franchises, those will get bought up right away. Spider-Man 2 recently was another one that sold a ton right out the gate. The thing is, and kind of the tricky point about virtual reality, is we don't really have those legacy franchises. Yes, we're starting to get a lot of sequels in the last few years, and developers are really starting to try to build those franchises, but they don't really have like the name value over extended length of time that a lot of flat gaming does. Yes, we are getting a lot of sequels in VR now, and I love to see it. I'm really happy about that. In the last year or so, we've gotten like Another Fisherman's Tale, Asgard's Wrath 2, Arizona Sunshine 2, I Expect You to Die 3, and so on. But is there that rabid fan base ready to play that on day one as there are for like I just said, for Zelda games? I wager not, because unfortunately VR hasn't been around that long to build up that level of brand equity with its fans. Now, the first games in all those franchises did really well enough to merit a sequel, but have they built up enough brand recognition to overcome that lack of perception of value that especially comes with VR games, because a lot of VR games tend to be on the shorter side? Going back to the example of Arizona Sunshine 2, as beloved as that first game is by the VR community, how many people heard about how long or how not long the campaign was and it said, for 5 hours I'm probably going to wait for a sale, I don't really think it's worth $50. The game I mentioned earlier that just came out this week and is already on discount is Riven. That's a sequel to Myst, the remake from Cyan Worlds. This is a hybrid game, so you can play it on flat and in VR if you buy it on Steam. On Quest, obviously, it's just in VR. But if you look at the Steam summer sale now, that game's on sale for 26% off already. And the game just came out. It's June 28th as I record this podcast. The game came out on June 25th. 3 days later, it's already being marked off. And you see a lot of new games come out on Steam at an introductory offer, quote, a 10% off. Just recently in the last few weeks, and I talked about this on the Max Mustard episode a couple of weeks ago, a lot of developers on the Quest platform are actually following Max Mustard's lead, and they've been doing major deep discounts for like 80% off, 90% off. Just looking into prominent examples on the main Meta store, Zombieland Headshot Fever did a 90% off discount, and on June 25th, it was the #1 selling game on the Quest platform. Shortly thereafter, Death Horizon Reloaded, a zombie shooter without an IP that people really recognize, also did 90% off, so that game was $3 as well. That game replaced Zombieland on #1 on the Quest store. Zombieland dropped all the way down to 14th. Now, when you're talking about a 90% off sale, that spreads like wildfire through Discords and subreddits and Facebook groups and all over X and other social media. So people gobble that game up right away, but that means your window of sales is probably, I don't know, 3 days or so before the next sale comes to market. And then all that kind of goes out the window and you're back to square one if you're a game developer. Now, I would imagine that most developers are writing off the cost of that discount as just basically marketing costs and the cost of doing business, because it's a fast way to get more people into your game. And once you have more people in your ecosystem, then you're feeding them notifications through like the Horizon feed. You can show updates within the game itself. You can basically get them back into the game, hopefully if you hook them well with a good first impression. And that's assuming they even install the game. I've talked to 2 different developers. I'm gonna keep their names out of it for the sake of anonymity. And I'm not talking about the company I work for, 3 Pound Games, just for the record. These are 2 other developers. But these teams did steep discounts on on their games, and they looked at the sales, and the sales did very well for them, somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from several hundred if they're a very small team with a very low profile on side quests, up to several thousand, even like the tens of thousands if they're on the main meta store. But then they looked at the install numbers, and the install rate is something like 10%, meaning of the people who bought the game, only 10% or so of them actually installed the game on their headsets and are actually going to end up playing it. So while the temporary revenue boost is nice, and frankly it will keep the lights on for a lot of these studios and allow them to continue developing on their projects, in the long run you got a nice boost in your sales, but is that translating into player numbers, or is that game going to sit uninstalled on your headset on your PC if you're on Steam, likely to never be played, if not played a year or two from now, when you're just kind of bored on like a weekend, you got nothing to do, you might fire that game and play it for like an hour, say okay that was alright, and then not play it anymore. To be clear, there is no right or wrong answer to this. There is no this side's to blame or that side's to blame, because this isn't really a problem per se. It's just a really interesting shift in what's happening in gaming as more and more companies go to like live service games or free to play games with microtransactions, as you see like the Fortnites of the world making billions of dollars, as you see a game in VR like Gorilla Tag making $100 million in revenue, and that game has always been free to play. We've even seen some other games like for instance Hyperdash about a year and a half ago go from a paid app to free to play and just start baking in microtransactions to get people to build up revenue that way. Population 1 on Quest just went free to play a few months ago, even though it's still a paid app on Steam, but on Quest, because there's so much monetization built into that game, they're able to make their money back that way, as opposed to paying a $30 upfront fee. I talked about another game called Inverse, which is a 4v1 asymmetrical horror game. That game originally started at $30 when it first came out, and people didn't really flock to it because it didn't represent a perception of value for them, even though that's a game that you can play over and over and over again because the gameplay loop is designed that way. But now at the price it's at now, more people have been able to get into it. But at the price Inverse sits at now, which I just checked the meta store before I came on to record this podcast, is just $10. People are more likely to take a flyer on it, which will increase your player base and hopefully fill up those lobbies so you're not playing with bots all the time. But then that puts the pressure on these developers to constantly be updating and constantly be putting out new content and advertising that to keep as many people in the game as possible, because your player count is something that like investors look at. They're looking to like give you some seed money to make your next game, or if you're looking at if you want to continue updating that game, if you want to continue iterating on top of it, do you want to make a sequel to it because it did really well. Those numbers are really kind of hard to determine because of that data becomes a little bit harder to interpret because of deep discounts and things like that. And I'm curious where the point of inflection is and where that perception of value is going to shift away from price. I still think legacy franchises that have like brand equity with players will still draw players right away. But in the realm of VR, where that isn't so much the case, there's only maybe a handful of games that would have that. Like for instance, I think if Beat Saber released a sequel, that would get gobbled up. I think if Gorilla Tag released a sequel, that would do very well. Vacation Simulator, the spiritual sequel to Job Simulator, has sold over 1 million copies. Alchemy Labs, the developer of Job Simulator and Vacation Simulator, is the only VR developer that's ever had 2 games sell over 1 million units. And just looking at developers that have put out sequels, you see their first games on sale all the time. I see Moss 1 on sale all the time, Espire 1 on sale all the time. The first 2 Pixel Rip games go on sale all the time because they're trying to get people into those earlier games, and then hopefully they love them and they want to continue playing those games. Oh hey, there's Pixel Rip 1978 now available. Oh hey, there's I Expect You to Die 3 now available. It almost feels like another branch of marketing to determine to put your game on sale specifically to get players in there, and then hopefully you hook them and you get them into your other projects or into the other games in your franchise if you're making sequels. Now this is the summer, and I'm curious if we're going to see this trend continue into the fall, where we start getting some of the bigger titles that we know are coming to VR this year, like Batman Arkham Shadows, like Metro, like Aliens, like Behemoth, like the Wanderer remake. How are those games going to stand up to the really intense discount and value shopping that we're seeing in the middle of the summer right now? And are those games going to hold up, or are those games going to kind of buck the trend? Gonna be really interesting to find out. That's a wrap for this episode. You can catch Live Open daily 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, and YouTube. Also check me out on Twitch. I stream VR there several days a week. I'm at Live Open Mike on Twitch. Thanks, and I'll talk to you on Monday.